is a place of eternal torment, a cesspool of sin and suffering, a world of everlasting despair, hell.
Part of the essence of hell is that one chooses it.
To understand this vision, journey into Dante's Inferno, the book that brought hell to life. In medieval Italy, Dante Alighieri wrote an epic poem called the Inferno, which has defined hell for Western culture. Dante himself is the main character. He's lost his way and is in a crisis of deep despair.
The Inferno is the greatest work ever written about what we in our jargon call depression. Dante considers it a sin, indeed his sin, and he tries to deal with that sin by showing himself all the ways that souls injure themselves.
The poem opens in the dark wood of error, a place that symbolizes the sin and corruption in Dante's soul. Dante has sent the spirit of the great poet Virgil to guide him out of the dark woods and towards the path of salvation.
He's not the person he set out to be, that he finds himself in this dark wood of error. He doesn't know how to get out of there. And there are no shortcuts when you're in that situation.
For Dante, Virgil is the model poet. He has written about hell, about the Roman Empire, and prophetically about the coming of Christ.
Virgil represents the greatness of all the classical art, and Dante represents, especially if we compare him to epic heroes, killers with swords, he is a guy with a writing instrument, a man, a person, and he represents the soul that is on a voyage.
Together, they will descend through the 9 circles of hell. Dante's 9 circles give hell a defining structure. Each circle contains a distinct group of sinners. The further down Dante ventures, the worse the sins and the punishments become.
Dante works very hard to create not just a physical geography that allows him to punish sinners appropriately, but he creates a moral geography.
The Inferno is about the difficulty and exertion of living a human life. If we're lucky, life is a voyage or a quest, and the Inferno is about that quest through a life.
Little is known about Dante's life. His mother died when he was very young, and by adolescence, he was an orphan. Dante was not only a well-known poet, he was also a successful politician. In 1300, he was elected one of the 6 magistrates who ruled Florence. But in 1302, his political career ended when a coup occurred. In his absence, Dante was charged with corruption and sentenced to burn at the stake. His absence became exile. He could never return. Dante's beloved city had betrayed him.
Everything seemed to have been lost. His political career was gone. His house was gone. The style of living he was used to was gone. And no doubt there was some despair.
It seems pretty clear that he could not have written the poem without that exile. It's what allowed him to think about things in a much larger context, and coming to terms with that exile is really, in a very large sense, what the poem is actually all about.
To begin the quest, Dante and Virgil must enter the gates of hell.
When they first arrive at the gates of hell, there's a sign posted that says, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." The most terrifying aspect I find of Dante's Inferno is the idea that it is the place without hope. And that theme comes up again and again when they're going down through the bowels of hell.
We are lost, afflicted only this one way, that having no hope, we live in longing. I heard these words with heartfelt grief that seized on me.
Hope was central to the Middle Ages. Life was nasty, brutish, and short. Religious and political violence was the rule, not the exception. Disease was rampant and inexplicable. For many, the hope of eternal life provided a reason to endure the suffering of their daily lives.
The last thing you wanted to do was to end up in eternity in a world that looked an awful lot like the one you just came from. The images of torment and physical danger in Dante's Inferno do reflect something of that cultural experience.
The Inferno is part of a trilogy called the Divine Comedy that begins in hell and goes through purgatory to heaven. In this trilogy, Dante realizes that our ultimate fate in the afterlife is determined by the choices we make in this life.
The Divine Comedy was definitely a book about choice. It was definitely a book written for the living to sort of make people stop and think about not just what they're doing, but about the path of their lives, about what they want to accomplish in life.
When the condemned sinners arrive in hell, they must go before the judge Minos to receive their punishment and placement in hell.
What hell does is register the kind of person you've become and kind of recreate that in an eternal way. What Dante is doing is finding imaginative ways to present a geography of choice.
The first place Dante and Virgil visit is Circle 1, Limbo. All the unbaptized souls, including Virgil, reside there. Their only punishment is eternity without the vision of God.
His journey is a journey out of the dark wood of error, and he's not out of the forest yet.
Dante's Inferno brought us a vision of hell like no other. He populated the underworld with real people, real torture, and real pain.
I don't think anyone can presume to describe hell physically except in Dante's terms. His imagination has permanently fixed our image of hell.
People have done better at using Dante as a kind of inspiration than as an object of imitation. I don't think anybody has really come along in modern media who has done something with the Inferno that really stands up. But it's pretty clear that Dante is an influence in an awful lot of work.
After Dante wrote the Inferno, artists began to illustrate his vision. Michelangelo's famous painting, The Last Judgment, was inspired by Dante. For Dante, the Bible was the authority on the afterlife, but it spoke in vague, mystical terms.
What will we do with hell?
Dante expanded on these ideas and gave hell shape, size, and structure.
All sin comes down to the breaking of God's law and the denial of God's glory. And in that sense, all sin is the same, even though its effects may be very different. So Dante's imagination ran wild here, and in a way that is perfectly consistent with the way we would design hell if we were its designer.
Clearly, there's no argument. The Bible is the single most important source for Dante and for Dante's vision. You have the story of the Exodus in Hebrew Scripture as a paradigm of liberation, going from slavery to freedom. Dante uses that as the paradigm story of his own journey, the journey of the pilgrim, from a life of sin to a life of redemption.
Dante probably would be the one that gave us the most clear picture of hell. Images that have captured the human imagination, it kind of in the way that Gehenna captured the imagination originally.
In the Bible, Jesus Christ warns his disciples about the Gehenna of fire. Gehenna was a fiery garbage dump outside the city of Jerusalem.
It was not just a garbage dump. All the sewers would drain directly into this valley, so that there was always a current of urine and feces coursing through the place, and mold and mildew. The trash that had been left there was all maggot-ridden.
The biblical references to Gehenna refer to it as the place where the worm never dies.
When the prophets were trying to describe to sinners what the afterlife would be like, they used this imagery. They'd all smelled it, they'd all seen it. And so the prophets would say, well, if you're not careful, you are going to spend eternity in a place such as this.
Each culture interprets hell differently. For the people of Jerusalem, it was Gehenna. Starting in the 14th century, hell became Dante's Inferno.
Hell is a big marketing ploy, especially these days, not just in the media. There are products that use images of the devil to sell their wares. It's a very marketable idea. Hell appears so often in movies and music videos, television commercials. It's sort of a kind of a fun place for the wild crowd.
You've taken to sin with such minimal prompting.
A place where you can play loud music and where the women are always scantily dressed and beautiful. You can drink as much as you want. You can do whatever you want.
Dante wrote the Inferno with a set purpose in mind, and the purpose was basically to try and convince people that they should live better, that they should kind of look at their vices and see where they need to change in order to avoid hell and move towards paradise. If you look at all the different levels of the Inferno, each one is dedicated to different vices and different crimes that really any of us could commit.
Dante wrote the Inferno as a devout Catholic, but his vision goes beyond Catholic doctrine.
Even if you removed some of the theology that's specifically Christian, there is a moral structure that is consistent and clearly has universal applicability. Everywhere in the world, Dante as a moral voice and a moral force and a moral categorizer is important.
Dante's journey into hell is a psychological endeavor. The deeper he goes, the harder it is to avoid the reality of sin and pain.
Before he can move toward God, he's really got to examine evil in all of its forms, which is, to some extent, holding up a mirror. That's what these sinners do. They hold up a mirror to Dante, what he might be, what he might become, if he doesn't turn away from that. It's a journey in self-knowledge and self-realization for somebody who starts in a dark wood of error and comes to understand the nature of evil by the end of the journey when he gets to the bottom of hell.
The journey continues. Dante and Virgil descend to the fifth circle of hell, where Dante's role as a frightened observer comes to an end. In the circle of the wrathful and sullen, the vengeful sinners of wrath are doomed to fight and argue on the banks of the river Styx. The sullen hide, stuck in the mud below the murky water. As Dante and Virgil cross the river Styx, they are recognized by a political enemy of Dante's. Filippo Argenti is angered to find Dante in hell and alive. Dante's anger gets the better of him, and he lashes out.
What seems to be happening here is this sense that with Dante, he's sort of getting a chance to pay back one of the folks who did him wrong.
And I said, Master, truly I should like to see that spirit pickled in this swill before we've made our way across the lake. And he to me, before we see the shore, you will be satisfied, for what you seek is fitting. After a little, I saw him endure fierce mangling by the people of the mud, a sight I give God thanks and praises for. He tells Virgil, I would really like to see Filippo Argenti mangled and boiled and pickled in this dirty swamp. Could I see that? And Virgil says, oh, that's a good desire, yes. We'll see that, I promise. This is somewhat alien to our sensibility, and it seems to me Dante is writing about the individual grudges and desires and appetites of the soul as that soul journeys towards some place above or beyond those desires and appetites.
The scene at the river Styx marks the beginning of Dante's transformation. He's learned not to pity the damned, but he still seeks revenge for his exile. His pilgrimage isn't over yet.
Dante, the narrator, is not simply wandering through an interesting place, a kind of hell's mouth for tourists. But what he's doing is actually changing personally and internally along the way.
To free himself from vengeance, Dante must witness the consequences of malicious intent. In the depths of hell, he will face the sinners of violence. Dante Alighieri wrote the Inferno for the widest possible readership. He wanted people to realize that the choices we make in life have significant consequences. To illustrate the idea that not all sins are created equal, Dante placed a walled division between upper and lower hell, distinguishing sins of weakness from sins of malice.
There's the evil that comes from human weakness, where we simply slip and slide into the kind of mistakes and choices that are not helpful to our growth, and those kinds of choices that may in fact hurt others by the consequences, but we didn't really intend them. We weren't trying to hurt someone else. Or the other kind, where people are genuinely malicious. They want to hurt someone else, for whatever reason, rationalized in their own heads.
Dante and Virgil are crossing the river Styx to enter the walled city of Dis in lower hell.
We had progressed into the deep-dug moats that circle near the walls of that bleak city which seemed cast of solid iron.
Even in hell, those guilty of the most violent and horrific acts have to be locked up and guarded.
We were talking about Paolo and Francesca, and we were explaining how she was blaming the book and she was blaming love, but she wouldn't accept blame for herself. And a student of ours, a murderer, put up his hand and said, "That's me. That's why I'm here."
My hell basically has been being forced to sit there and hear things that you know are not true. People don't even care about the present of what's taking place. They just look at the past of what you've done and they paint a picture, not knowing the individual, not knowing the circumstances. To me, that's hell. I mean, that eats me up when I choose to dwell on it.
To live with the view of the self as evil and going to hell is unacceptable for most people. One of the most fascinating things that I have learned in my 30 years as a forensic psychologist is that even people who have committed many crimes, serious crimes, they all regard themselves as decent people. Many people have a fascinating way of justifying the things they've done wrong.
Although Dante didn't commit many of the sins that he faces in the poem, he is still forcing himself to see his own reflection within the sinners of hell. By doing this, he has a chance to change his eternal destiny.
I feel for the family, but for the victim, I can't say I have any remorse. I mean, you know, when you do wrong, it catches up with you, no matter what side of the fence that you're on. I went to go sell a guy a gun. He tried to take the gun and the money, and he was initially, he was shot twice. It sounds real bad, but when you look at it, I mean, he got what his hand called for.
If anybody commits a crime, or if anybody hurts another person, but they don't see the hurt, and they think that the fault lies outside themselves, there's nowhere to go. Because all responsibility is deflected. There is no judge, police officer, parent or wife that can make somebody change against his or her will. So eventually the person has to become fed up with himself or herself. In other words, there's got to be internal motivation, really, for any of us to change. It's trying to help a person make a new series of choices in life, but in a totally different direction from the direction he's taken previously. The therapist is the guide along the way.
In his quest to return to awareness from despair, Dante often looks to his guide, Virgil. Virgil helps Dante face his dark side, his sins and the errors of his judgment. Only then can Dante emerge into the light of right thinking.
Dante needs Virgil to guide him through the process because the writer, Dante, thinks that no one can do this pilgrimage alone. That this is really a communal effort. Yes, you make your own choices, but without a guide, you might not get there.
Dante is very good at imagining a correlative physical embodiment of a sin. And these are not only clever, they enforce the idea that the sin is its own pain, that the diminishment of the soul hurts. So every time he imagines a sin, he's not just imagining a separate punishment and offense, he's trying to imagine a self-wounding as one thing.
The biblical understanding of hell is deeply satisfying. And by that I mean that there is a yearning in our hearts, and if we're really honest with ourselves, to know that there will be that great settling of the scales, that justice will prevail, and that the right will be rewarded and the wrong will be punished.
Throughout many cultures and really throughout the world, hell has always been the last hope for justice. There is the concept that no matter what you've done in life, no matter how rich you are, how wealthy, how powerful, if you have involved yourself in evil, you will have to pay in hell.
Amid this horde, cruel, grim, and dense, people were running, naked and terrified. Their hands were tied behind their backs with snakes that thrust between where the legs meet, entwining tail and head into a knot in front.
Perhaps it's not that we're attracted to torment and suffering so much as we like seeing some people get their comeuppance.
Dante wants his readers to see that to sin is a choice, and the wages of sin are the death of the soul.
Why do we choose to sin and wither? Dante asks that question. He says, who gathers together so much torment? And in some ways, the answer is that we do. Inferno, in some ways, is a kind of schooling of Dante's will. He sees the spectacle or pageant of all the ways that souls wound themselves in order to school his will in a better direction.
Before Dante can find the righteous path, he must first face absolute evil, Satan himself. Dante's Inferno is a guidebook for life. No other literary work has better defined the nature of sin. Dante and Virgil make their final descent to the ninth and last circle of hell, the icy abyss of Satan.
Hell is an absence. As light is present and dark is an absence of light energy, and cold is an absence of heat energy, sin is an absence of soul, of moral energy. Therefore, at the very pit and the center of hell is a profound absence of heat or warmth. It is profoundly dead, therefore frozen. It's the ultimate negative.
We sometimes use expressions like hotter than the hinges of hell, and we might expect that at the bottom of hell we have heat and fire, but it's exactly the opposite. We have ice, we have cold, because we're farthest away from God, and God is on fire with love. Therefore, ice and cold really represent hate, while in a lot of traditional Christian symbolism, fire represents love.
This is the ultimate imprisonment. They're not just imprisoned in hell, they can't move in hell. Because of their evil, they are just damned to stay there forever, fixed in this terrible place.
The center of hell is not just that you don't love someone, but that you betray someone you love. You deliberately pervert your intimate relationship with this person and reverse it.
Dante places betrayal at the bottom of hell as the worst sin because Dante himself had felt betrayed by his church and by his countrymen and really by fate.
Dante has freed himself of the sins of weakness, malice, and fraud. Now he is prepared to face absolute evil. Dis, or Satan, as he's more commonly called, is frozen at his waist in the ice of hell.
Look, here is Dis, he said, and here is the place where you must arm yourself with the quality of fortitude. How chilled and faint I was on hearing that. You must not ask me, reader. I do not write it. Words would not suffice.
Satan is not only pictured as the fallen angel. Dante envisions him as a three-headed figure overcome with sorrow, mourning, and weeping in a veil of tears. His wings beat incessantly, freezing everything in its place.
What we see is this great parody of the Trinity. If God is power, wisdom, and love, Satan is impotence, ignorance, and hate. And just as we see that parody of the Trinity with the three heads, we also see there are three sinners. The greatest betrayer of the Roman Empire, Brutus and Cassius, and the greatest and most direct betrayer of God, that is to say, the betrayer of God incarnate, Jesus, and of course that would be Judas.
Dante uses that theme again of betrayal and of pride in his Inferno to show that God doesn't force people to sin. The devil doesn't force people to sin. But people make the choice to sin, and really ultimately every sin is an act of pride.
Dante wants to find a pathway to God. This journey has shown him the way.
People who have denied God will go to hell.
I think I'm just going to sit in a box for a good long while after I die.
It is really a state of mind, or state of mental consciousness.
If I end up going to hell, then it's my fault for making the wrong choices.
Hell is the freezing up of our choices when we don't have them anymore. It turns out that we've made choices all along the way, which means that at the end of our life, we've become a certain kind of person.
At the conclusion of Dante's journey, he is no longer in a state of despair, wandering through the dark wood of error. He has seen his own sins and faced his own evil. A new path awaits him.
Come, the way is long, the road remaining to be crossed is hard. Rise to your feet, the Master said. The sun is at mid-tierce.
I don't think anyone has ever written a book that is about more essential things. It's a book about the center of living a life. The fact that a life must end, the fact that a life takes many petty turns, the fact that a life is also in the context of eternity on either side of it. No one has ever written more eloquently or directly about such things.
Dante ascends from hell to start another journey, the journey towards hope and heaven.
Keep watching. Discussion topics and activity and resources for great books, Dante's Inferno, are up next on Assignment Discovery.